Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
So what's going on in the internet world and the cyber world, Dave? I know we got big stuff happening with that war over in Ukraine, and what's going on in the cyber world as it relates to that?
Okay, but first let me go strongly on the record. It is unconscionable for Russia to have invaded Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't have happened. There are tens of thousands dying because of it, for no good cause.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of unconscionable things my country has done as well, but since we're talking about Ukraine, that's what's there. The technical news for Ukraine is that, yes, there has been a cyber war going on. It's much less than people feared, and the reporting is even less than that. The most important one is that apparently the Russians, knocked out a Viasat satellite with a denial of service attack, and it was down for several days. The Ukraine army, or the Ukraine armed forces, were using that Viasat service for command and control. So the Russians did just take it out.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, it's not at all clear what the Ukrainians and allies are doing. Pile of hackers have dumped on the Russians a lot of ways. The anonymous folks have come in. There was a listing of thousands of Russian troops and their details, which probably was hacked by the Ukrainians or friends.
Mm-hmm.
Although didn't have the United States as an active participant in the war, we may have cracked it and send it there. There's a technology story from Ukraine that's worth bringing up, even though it's not particularly our things. It turns out that missiles are working, old missiles are working against tanks and most of the Russian Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
They've taken out hundreds.
Old missiles. This is stuff that was in Ukraine's arsenal, or
Some of it was in Ukraine's arsenal from before 1989 when they left the Soviet Union. Some of it was supplied by the United States, who got it from, I think, Poland, and then shipped it to Ukraine, also back from Soviet days. And a lot of it is the shoulder-fired Stinger that I remember the US was giving to Osama bin Laden and friends in the early days of the Afghan war.
Mm-hmm.
And the news are reporting them as Russia not having complete control of the air. The Ukrainians are very proud of a few dogfights they've won, but it looks like it was mostly missiles. The number of tanks, we shouldn't have been that surprised by the number of tanks that were lost, because it's happened before. Russia has a pile of tanks, mostly the shoulder-fired Ukrainian missiles that the US is supplying by the thousand, or the US and allies are supplying by the thousand to the Ukrainians. We are an active participant in that war. There's no two ways about it. We're just supplying too much. Now, the reason I brought that here is something that hasn't been reported. What I just told you about the Russian losses has been reported regularly. What hasn't been reported is the implication of what's going on. If you look at military history, going back, well, at least to the ancient Greeks, there's been an ongoing battle between offensive and defensive weapons. The classic example was the castles with walls that were built, fortified in the medieval era, which did an excellent job in many cases, including most notably in Constantinople until 1453, when a few giant cannons took them out. So that was a case where you had a defensive weapon, the walls, that were beefed up, and there was a lot of sophistication into how they were made. That was holding off many, many sieges. Toulouse is one, of course, and there was something like 3 major sieges of Constantinople that failed until the cannon came, was the offensive weapon. It looks like the anti-aircraft missiles are seriously affecting the Russian air superiority. They can be launched from 25 miles away. They are mostly 30 and 40-year-old missiles, but most of the planes being thrown by the United States and Russia are also 30 or 40 years old. We've got a few. But the tanks is one that I shouldn't have been surprised at, because it happened before. Israel's second invasion of Egypt, or maybe Egypt was coming back across the Suez Canal, and Israel got their tanks to Suez within the first 48 hours, hundreds of them. They were expected to be devastating. The Russian anti-tank missiles that have been supplied to the Egyptians knocked out so much of the Israeli artillery, and especially the tanks, that the United States had to organize what was then the largest air shipment of arms to rebuild the Israeli weapon supply. Israel had been, armor had been totally wiped out. And you see some of that going on. There was some super armor that was, which among other things, even the Iraqis had some. And the Americans had to come up with an offensive weapon that could deal with that. And they were using depleted uranium because it's one of the heaviest things out there, which may have had some effect irradiating our soldiers and so on. So it looks like at this point, remember, the US lost the war in Afghanistan. We've lost the war in Syria. We probably can be said to have lost the war in Iraq. And of course, the Russians also lost the war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So that's saying that the technology that the major powers have is very effective on the defensive side right now, which affects decisions. It was clearly a mistake for the Russians to go into Ukraine. Everybody, including the US Defense Department and everybody, the American defense establishment, was sure Russia would just roll over Ukraine in 2 weeks. I'm sure Putin saw it the same way. Obviously, that didn't happen. So that's it. So that level of technology, back and forth, and we have a similar war in cyberspace all the time. And in general, the hackers are winning. We know the latest news, beside some of the stuff coming out of Russia, but they haven't been doing that much. But the White House put out the word that Russia's ready to take down half of the American electric supply if we're not careful.
Really? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, it was from the White House telling everybody to up their defenses because the Russians were looking at what they could do. A fellow who I think knew who he was talking about, he was a major internet engineer at high level, worked at Akamai, said it was a miracle because many of his friends, probably dozens that he could think of, knew enough about the internet to destroy it. This was 20 years ago.
Really?
But it hadn't, yeah. It was very vulnerable, and it's still very vulnerable. But nobody chose to. I think, no, I did a show on BAI about that one. It's that far back. The latest one is some hackers got into Microsoft and are dropping source code on the internet. Vint Cerf, who has a little bit of experience with the internet, always says there is no unhackable system. And the evidence from the US Defense Department, the US State Department, the CIA itself, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and so on, is that even darn good technical people with nearly unlimited budgets can't always protect the system. Which is why people like Vince say that you can't put backdoors in systems for the cops, because if there's a backdoor there, somebody's going to find it.
They're going to find it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, Dave. I mean, you just raised an interesting point that I hadn't thought about before when you said that folks some 20 years ago said that there were ways to destroy the internet. I mean, I'm wondering what you think. Why hasn't that happened? Maybe it's not in anyone's interest to do that.
Well, whose interest is it? It's not in the interest of any serious hacker.
Mm-hmm.
Because serious hackers are making money on the internet.
No internet, what do we do?
That was one of the things that was put there.
Right.
The other is there is a culture of internet engineers who all know each other, who at that point all knew each other, all got together regularly, IETF and before that, respected each other, and were generally good folks who didn't want to destroy what they had built.
Mm-hmm.
So there weren't many evil people there, except the hackers of various flavors. And the hackers, whether it be government spies or ransomware folks, don't want to take down the internet. That's the major tool.
Yeah.
I suspect it's harder now. Our friends at the Internet Society have been pushing manners. There's been dozens of improvements to the organization of the internet. But I bet there's a whole lot that could be done to bring it down still.
Yeah.
And the lucky Russians haven't done it.
Yeah, I'm interested in, I don't know if this is a good segue, but the whole notion that I've been hearing about digital sovereignty as it relates to cybersecurity and in particular cyber warfare. What is digital sovereignty? I'm one of the very few
people in the United States who thinks it's a very good idea. The question is whether the European Union should control access to computers in the European Union and keep the data inside the European Union. And India has been very strong on this as well. Or everything should go back to Google and Facebook and other American companies, all of whom have often cooperated with the US government. And the US law forces them literally thousands of times a year to hand over information. And the Europeans and the Indians, and of course the Russians and Chinese, have been very strong saying they wanted control because they did not want all their data going to where the US government had easy access to it.
Mm-hmm.
Internet folks say that's going to destroy the internet. If Google has to put servers in Europe and not take everything back to the US, that will destroy the economics of Google, which is an utter and total nonsense. Google has dozens of data centers across Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Europe, India, Russia, China are markets that are big enough that it doesn't seriously get in the way of Google or Facebook or any of the large multinationals. You can keep the data where the customers are. Now, if Benin was insisting that Google built a data center, that might affect things. But when Germany does it, Google can live quite well with keeping German data in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of the nonsenses that people are coming out because they think the way the internet was built is the only way it could be. And they don't look at what the harms are and what some of the things that could be done to change it.
Mm-hmm.
All our Internet Society friends are really big on never changing the internet. And some of the changes may be right. Now, the key case, in fact, I had this out with Andrew Sullivan before he got involved in the Internet Society. That's how I happened to know him. 6 or 8 years ago, the Russians said they had to be able to run their own internet because the Internet ICANN, the organization there, is an American company organized under American law and overwhelmingly dominated, like the Internet Society, by the Americans and their allies. So Russia was legitimately afraid of being cut off. Now, at the time, I did two things. One, I looked at it and said, it's highly unlikely. But the second thing I said, would it really hurt the internet if Russia kept all its own data in Russia and its own server? And the answer I got, first from Columbia Professor El Ninone, and second from a ICANN CEO, whose name I'm forgetting right now, was that yes, there's no reason Russia couldn't set up its own system as long as it was robustly interconnected to the other parts of the world.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it, Dave? The interconnection, as opposed to where the servers sit. Isn't that the real, where everything turns?
That's my opinion, and I gave you a few authorities. Vint Cerf told me that was utter nonsense, and I don't have the perspective to say whether the head of ICANN or Vint Cerf knows this better. However, one of the things I thought 5 years ago, that it wasn't a big issue, has really come up. The Ukrainians and US senators and a whole lot of other people are demanding that Russia be cut off the internet. Andrew Sullivan is actually one of the most prominent people who said it shouldn't be cut off. But it's absolutely the right thing for the Russians to do in the interest of Russia to make sure they have a system that the US can't just shut down. Like the Ukrainians have now asked them to shut down. And that's all the digital sovereignty argument and the back and forth. But the notion that networks are secure has just been disproved a long time ago. And none of the serious internet people, and I've had to check the chance to talk sometimes on this air with the people who actually built the internet, some of them pretty famous. Vint has been very public on this kind of stuff, and he's helped me out privately with thinking about some of it. There are no secure systems. The CIA and Microsoft and the US Department of Defense and the NSA on their most valuable hacking tools couldn't protect them. Nobody is safe. And everything you have to do has to be made on the assumption that if a government level outfit wants to come after you, they're probably going to get in. Now, I use that idea talking about one of the biggest issues in geopolitics right now, the US war on Huawei in China. Huawei is China's leading tech company. It had over $100 billion in sales, and it was growing rapidly. It reached the highest sales, well, it was the highest sales in telecom equipment, and it was, at least in one quarter, the highest sale in mobile phones.
Globally the highest sale.
Globally the highest sale. 1 quarter. Samsung is usually ahead. And Apple's prices are so high that if you do it by the dollar amount as opposed to the number of phones, Apple always wins. And we should get back to that Apple in a minute. But so the US decided that we had to take down Huawei by whatever means necessary.
And this was under the Trump administration, wasn't that, Dave?
The Biden administration has continued the policy.
Okay.
fact, we just shut down some more Chinese phone companies that weren't tapping or doing anything to anybody. Now,
And
there was
the rationale, let me just quickly, the rationale is that these Chinese companies could potentially infiltrate our communication systems with their equipment. Is that the rationale, or is it just
the most sophisticated rationale was not that they could infiltrate our systems. Remember, there's zero evidence that Huawei has ever done anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And with the US having thousands of people involved in monitoring Huawei, if they were doing anything significant, it would have been found. So clearly, Huawei was not doing any monitoring. Whether or not they could monitor, presumably you could protect on that. I can visualize the system that would protect on that and rapidly shut down if any data was going at places it wasn't wanted. So what came from the people who are actually now in the Biden administration, I'm thinking of one guy who was, I think, at Brookings and wrote on this in Foreign Affairs or something like that, was not that Huawei was fine, and not even that Huawei was capable of spying, but that Huawei was capable of knocking out systems that they had installed, and that could knock out all the IoT in the United States, which is a big issue for the Defense Department.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that was cited by David Sanger of the Times when I got a chance to talk to him about that. In other words, it is far-fetched to think there is a real security problem, but I don't know that for sure, because when we're talking about the deepest level of the most important companies of the most powerful countries in the world, a lot of this goes on far away from anything that I'm going to see.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you that for sure.
I'm wondering, Dave, how much of this is just trade wars? How much of it is
it's
just
massively trade war. There's no two ways about it. Among other things, the main thing that the US has done to Huawei is we've cut off their chip supply for mobile phones. That cut out 40% of their sales.
Wow.
It's $40 billion of sales in a year. And we can do that because there are exactly two companies in the world that can make the chips for 5G phones, which is Samsung in Korea and TSMC in Taiwan. And that was why I got into this subject. I was looking at whether the Chinese could build the 5 nanometer chips that are required for 5G phones. To do them, you need a machine called an EUV machine, extreme ultraviolet, that can make almost unbelievably fine lines on a chip. They're now putting, I'm going to say this number twice, 20 billion transistors on ordinary chips that go into high quality or high priced cell phones.
20 billion transistors, Dave?
20 billion.
Dave, let me just pause for a minute, because you and I are old enough to remember when a transistor radio that had 8 or 9 transistors was, wow, I got a 9 transistor radio. Wow. Sorry.
No,
I just had to do that aside.
What's going on in the chip manufacturing is really amazing. In fact, what's going on in chip manufacturing today is what many of the best chip engineers 5 and 10 years ago thought was going to be impossible.
Mm-hmm.
They thought that Moore's Law was going to be over now.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, especially with the EUV machines, which only come from one company, which is not American, it's Dutch, ASML. And there's nobody on earth making anything like a 5G chip except Samsung and TSMC using the ASML EUV machine.
What is this machine, Dave? ASML?
ASML is the name of the company.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Dutch company. The Dutch have been supporting semiconductor research massively, and the EU for 20 years. And they managed to make a machine using extremely fine wavelengths, extreme ultraviolet, that nobody else can match. The Japanese, Nikon, I think it was the main competition to ASML, spent something in the billions trying to develop their EUV, failed and gave up. It has been called the most complicated machine ever built. And it cost $200 million.
Wow.
That's for a bare bones model.
Mm-hmm. No frills.
No frills, and you got to pay them a huge amount for the service contract.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, Dave, we're going to take a brief break. This is WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. You're listening to Comedian Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. We're going to take a quick musical break and be back in a couple minutes. Stay tuned.
promenading and high hopes was fading, that dreams ever really come true. When up jumped springtime, I got a look at you. All at once it was heady, a gaze long and steady made sounds of the patter grow dim, and up jumped springtime, and love came on in. Now my heart wants to cheer, life's sweet promise is here, and love is a lovely thing. And we're sweethearts together, like bird and the feather. Our love is as free as the wind. 'Cause up jump springtime. So hello, my friend. Now my heart wants to cheer, life's sweet promise is here, and love is a lovely thing. And we're sweethearts together, like bird and the feather, our love is as free as the wind. 'Cause the jump spring time, so hello, my friend.
Okay, that was Abby Lincoln, Up Jump Spring with Stan Getz on tenor saxophone. We're back. This Community of Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHR 90.3 FM. And we're going to go back to Dave Burstein as soon as he unmutes himself there, Dave, if you would. Yes.
There we are.
Okay. We're back.
Okay. Just before the break, I was talking about nothing is secure. It had been demonstrated yet again. Microsoft was seriously hacked, and Microsoft's crown jewels source code are all over the internet now.
What is source code, Dave? Break that down. What do you said that crown jewels is all. What is that?
That's the actual programs. That's the original program written for Windows, Word. I don't know which source code was that.
Okay.
But obviously, having this source code tells you an awful lot about what Microsoft is doing.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And that's what you're ultimately going for. And I pointed out that when you look at the issues around technology and you look at decisions you have to make, you cannot, and my authority on this includes Vincerf, assume any system anywhere is safe if a government quality hacking team wants to come at it, whether that be China, the US, Russia, and apparently Iran and North Korea have broken into some very interesting things. And the Israelis are, of course, very good at it. But when we look at, and the reason I brought it up is that the US is strangling Huawei, China's key tech company, cost them $40 billion worth of phone sales, because nobody can make the 5 nanometer chips you need for the 5G phones or decent 5G phones. And you can only get those from Samsung and from TSMC, Taiwan and Korea. And they're only made, both of which are using a machine called an extreme ultraviolet, which comes from one source in the world, ASML in the Netherlands.
So how did the U.S. stop them from shipping to Huawei? How'd they do that?
The U.S. security people talked to the Dutch security people and said, don't do it, about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And then the next step was saying, and the US security people at the highest government level said to the Taiwanese and the Koreans, you must shut down Huawei. And the US security people have enough clout in Korea and Taiwan. In fact, this is one of the key grievances that have people thinking China may invade Taiwan. Shutting down the best chips in the world to China is a very powerful tool. So the question is, can the Chinese make it? Now, I looked at what's involved in making the most advanced chips. And there's, as I say, the most complicated machines in the world. And there are about 10 major components. And in every one of them, except the EUV, you could get, there's an Asian source, whether that be Japan, which makes a lot of this equipment, or Korea, or China itself, or Singapore. Everything needed to make the most advanced chips in the world can be sourced in Asia, except the EUV machine. And people like the Washington Post, quoting supposedly sophisticated, knowledgeable analysts, have been saying things the Chinese couldn't catch up for 10 years. I think that's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to guarantee you they're going to catch up in 4 years and replace an awful lot of the world's chip making capacity. But they're working really hard on it. The best universities in China have gotten involved directly in the semiconductor business. Tsinghua and Beijing University are deeply involved, setting up separate schools of semiconductor work, semiconductor engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And Tsinghua is very good. A friend of mine who teaches at Stanford says they're as good as Stanford. And there's only 2 other universities in the world that he says that about, MIT and Berkeley. So the ability is there, the money is there. Chinese government budgeted about $200 billion for the chip making effort.
Wow.
But the Chinese clearly have many capable people. They've been hiring dozens, maybe hundreds of the best engineers from Taiwan and Korea to make sure they have them. And I will guarantee that some part of the Chinese security apparatus, which stays very dark, has been probing everything at ASML. And I'd be very surprised if a government on an absolute high priority, multi-$100 billion project wants to bust the security at ASML, they've done it.
Yeah.
That
Somebody's
means
got to
China
be
has the
going after
blueprints.
that, Dave. As
Yeah.
critical as what they make is to the whole world economy, somebody's got to be going after that to be able to do it, other than the Dutch.
No.
No, you don't
There's
think so?
nobody outside of China that is even close. Because there are not that many people who make that kind of machine. It had been these are called lithography machines. They're the things that lay out the design on the chip itself.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking now about machines that work at the level of 5 billionths of a meter and are going down to 3 billionths of a meter. And that's not that much bigger than an individual atom.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, many of the best engineers didn't think we could get this far until EUV came out. So the 2 or 3 other companies that were making this kind of machine, after literally spending billions and failing, and the machines were delivered 10 or 15 years beyond when they wanted to have them and promised they'd have, didn't do it. So the Chinese have said they need it. They can't be cut off by the United States in the heart of their technology. And they are doing, I am sure, everything possible, legal or illegal, public or private, to make sure that the United States can't cripple China's technology.
Mm-hmm.
So, will it take 10 years for China to make a machine? There's 2 reasons, beside what I just said, the quality of engineering in China and the investment, that leads me to think they'll probably make them pretty darn soon. One of them is, give me a second, that we now know that the ASML EUV machine can work. The Japanese couldn't make it work. There's no American company that's even close to making it work. There's some other chip making equipment, but not lithography, which is the most important. And once you know that this kind of thing can work, it makes the engineering of it much easier. And the second reason is the key historic example of a country that decided it had to catch up and shocked the world when it did. In 1945 and 46,
Oh, Japan.
not Japan,
No?
Japan was taken out by the atomic bomb.
Yeah, but their recovery.
but not done anything like this for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Japan's technology was not close until at least about 1960.
Yeah.
Now, the Russians,
Mm-hmm.
once they knew that an atomic bomb could work, and recognizing how critical it was for them, put in an enormous crash program. And it took only 4 years for the Russians to build their atomic bomb, when everybody was saying they couldn't do it for 10 or 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big thing. Nuclear disarmament was a big thing in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And one worldism and so on. So if the Russians can build an atomic bomb in 4 years, and the spies had very little to do with it. There were some spies, but they didn't get very much. And Ethel Rosenberg almost definitely wasn't, and was executed to make a political point.
Mm-hmm.
Julius may have been involved. There's zero evidence against Ethel. But that's the security story that started out with our talking about what's happening in the Ukraine war, and went to Microsoft, and went to all the ordinary things. There is no security. So let's have a good story.
Okay, what you got?
What they got. I could live perfectly well with a $10 a month cell phone plan that was just introduced by T-Mobile.
That's a great price point, $10.
$10, unlimited phone calls, and I make a lot of phone calls, unlimited text, and 1 gigabyte of data. And if you don't do a lot of video when you're outside your house, you can get away with a gigabyte or 3. And I just looked, on the 23rd of the month, I have 35 gigabytes on my plan because it came with the phone. I've used 1.2 gigabytes.
Wow.
I would fit easily in their $15 plan. It gives 2 gigabytes from T-Mobile, and they have a $25 plan with 12 gigabytes, and those numbers are going to go up soon. Because once a network is built, it's really cheap to run. And almost every major phone company in the world now has a terrible problem of more capacity than they can sell. Because the equipment has gotten so much better so fast in the last 10 years, and especially the last 4 years, that there's a chart that Verizon CTO has, and he's showing this is our demand, and this is our capacity. And the margin between them was growing dramatically.
Dave, you just muted yourself, Dave. Come on, come back, Dave. Come back, Dave. Dave was just telling us about the expanding margin between capability and usage, and how there is so much more capability in the wireless networks than is being used. And accordingly, the cost of adding new services is de minimis. And as an example, T-Mobile just came out with a $10 a month plan, which is pretty astonishing for essentially unlimited calling, 1,000 texts, and 1 gigabit of data each month. So that's where we are with the wireless technology. Capacity way up, capability way up, pricing starting to come down. And I think Dave is back with us. Dave.
I'm back. One of the things that doesn't work very well is the appointment system at Mount Sinai Hospital, which I've been seeing a lot of lately, and it truly is an extraordinary institution. It's really hard to get an appointment in less than 2 months in some departments.
Wow.
And that was the call. So I was rude to our listeners and let you covered.
Okay. Had to take it. Got you. Okay, we got about 4 or 5 minutes left, Dave. What Had you finished with the T-Mobile discussion, or where'd you
Well,
want to go?
let's take the T-Mobile and put that to practical things for people, because we should have more practical things on this show.
Mm-hmm.
You don't use your phone for much video or heavy-duty gaming. You do not need more than a few gigabytes a month. As I say, we're on the 23rd of the month. I've used 1.2 gigabytes, and I have so much that I don't even bother checking or switching to Wi-Fi when I have Wi-Fi as a
Now,
choice.
break that down. When you say use your phone for video, you're talking about looking at videos on YouTube. You're talking about uploading video.
YouTube, Netflix, anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Video needs a lot of data. But if you're not doing much video or heavy-duty gaming, you're highly likely not to be using much data. If you go on the web, check your Facebook, send your email, maybe even make a few phone calls, which you can do on WeChat. Because audio doesn't need that much bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing like what video needs. You probably can get away with just a few gigabytes a month. So T-Mobile has come up with an offering. And as I was saying, there's a huge overcapacity, especially at T-Mobile, who's built the best network in the United States right now.
Is that right?
Yeah. Verizon and AT&T are 2 years behind at using mid-band spectrum, which has enormous capacity. And Verizon just a few months ago put an extra $10 billion into capital spending because they had to catch up. But they have all the capacity they really need. T-Mobile, as I say, the Verizon is one of my sources that they have excess capacity, and that's before the enormously productive mid-band spectrum. But so they have so much capacity. The question, they can't sell it. So how do you manage to get some money out of it if nobody is going to buy at the $50 or $70 regular rate? Well, one of the things you can do is you can try to sell it in another form. This from T-Mobile is prepaid people who already have a phone to plug in. So I could grab this Boost phone that I have, go to T-Mobile, pay them $10 or $15 a month, and have all the capacity I need. That may not be you. And an awful lot of people do a lot of video on the web. I'm trying to say not. So that is a very good deal. The one thing to know is that if you happen to have one of these phones that are locked, which never should have happened, once you pay off your initial contract, the company, whether it's Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile, is obligated to unlock it for you. And you can then take it to some of these really great discount plans that are coming because they're trying to get some money from all this bandwidth.
All that network they got out there. Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's some good news, Dave, and I think that's a point at which we can finish our conversation here on community and technology after such heavy stuff with the Ukraine and Russian cyber war and all the destruction that's going on
Just
there.
remember, there ain't no security if the people trying to get into you are really good and well financed, which means the major government.
Got you. No such thing.
Well, maybe the Israelis. There's an Israeli company that's been really evil.
Okay, well, thanks, Dave. This has been Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned next week, every Wednesday, 5 p.m. on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Thanks for tuning in. Good night. Night, Dave.